Welcome back, everyone. At this step, what we're doing is we are testing the solution we wrote against our test cases. The reason why this is a very crucial step is because your interviewer is going to ask you to do exactly this. They want to make sure that you understand what every step of the code you wrote is doing. And the only way that they can verify that is by asking you to walk through your solution using one of these test cases. So they want you to keep track of all the variables you're setting and how the code is going to flow and your logic. So this is very important for you to practice, because if you're not practiced with it, you will get stumbled upon having to walk through this code so rigorously. So let's get some practice together. Here you'll see that I have initialized our best case test case. The nums array that we're receiving is going to be this array of 13792, and our target is 11. What happens is we're going to walk into our code and we're going to initialize our for loop. Here we're going to initialize our P1 value, which is going to start at 0. Then we're going to move into the next line of our code where we're going to calculate and initialize this const of number to find. This is going to be equal to the target minus nums at P1. Target is equal to 11. Nums at P1 is equal to 1. So 11 minus 1 is 10. So I'm going to say NTF for shorthand because I don't have enough space here. So this is equal to 10. Then we're going to move on to our next line and initialize P2 in our for loop. P2 is equal to P1 plus 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So I'm going to say P2 is equal to 1. Then we're going to step into our for loop and we're going to do our check. And we're going to see if number to find is equal to the current value at P2. Number to find is 10. P2 is at 1. So this is 3. 3 is not equal to 10. So this ends. And what happens is that P2 is going to increment to 2. So we're going to go back in and we're going to check once again. Is number to find of 10 equal to P2 at 2, which is 7? No. 10 is not equal to 7. So once again, we are going to hit the end of that loop and we're going to increment P2 to 3. 3 is at this value of 9. Is 9 equal to 10 as per our check again? No. So once again, we are going to increment P2 to 4. And then 4 is equal to 2. Is the number to find at 10 equal to 2? It's not. So that means that we are going to try and increment P2 to 5. At this point inside of our for loop, we're going to see is P2, which is 5, less than nums.length? Nums.length is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is 5 lesser than 5? No, it's not. So that means that this loop closes, we reach the end of this for loop, and we now end this iteration. So now what happens is that P1 is going to iterate to 1. So once again, we're going to step back into this new iteration and redo all those steps. So we're going to recalculate our number to find. And number to find here is now going to be equal to the target, which is 11, minus nums at P1 at 1, which is 3. 11 minus 3 is 8. Once we've initialized this number to find value, we're going to step into our for loop again. P2 is equal to P1 plus 1. So P2 here is equal to 2. Then we're going to do our check. Is 8 equal to nums at P2, which is 7? No, 8 is not equal to 7. So what happens is that we hit the end of this loop and we are going to increment 2 to 3. Then we're going to check. Is 8 equal to the P2 value at 3? No, 8 is not equal to 9. So therefore we hit the end of the loop. We increment P2 again to 4. Now that P2 is at 4, is 8 equal to 2? No, it's not. So we are now going to increment P2 again. Once again, 5 is not lesser than 5, which is the nums.length. So we hit the end of this for loop, we exit out of it, we hit the end of this for loop, and once again, we increment P1. P1 is now going to be equal to 2, and we repeat this process. So now number to find is equal to target, which is 11, minus nums at 2. 2 is 7. 11 minus 7 is equal to 4. So then we're going to step into our second for loop, and P2 is going to initialize at P1, which is 2 plus 1, which is 3. And now we're going to step through our iteration again. Our number to find is 4. Is this equal to nums at P2, which is 3? 9 is not equal to 4. So that means that we hit the end of this check and we increment P2 to 4. Once again, we do this check again. Is 4 equal to P2 at 4, which is 2? 4 is not equal to 2, so once again, we increment P2. 5 is now, once again, no longer smaller than nums.length, which is 5. So that means that we've hit the end of this for loop, and we reinitialize these values, and P1 is going to increment. So now P1 is going to increment to 3. So once again, we're going to step into this current iteration, and we're going to say number to find is equal to target of 11 minus nums at P1, which is 3. So 9. 11 minus 9 is equal to 2. Then we're going to initialize P2 at P1 plus 1. So we're going to initialize it at position 4. So now when we do our check, is number to find, which is equal to 2, equal to nums at P2 of 4? It is. We're going to see that it's 2. 2 is equal to 2, so that means that we return our valid answer, which is an array containing P1 and P2. As we see, P1 is equal to 3, P2 is equal to 4. And as we know, this is indeed the correct answer for this test case. So this is how our interviewer is going to expect us to extensively walk through this process. It's very arduous and there's a lot of steps. So the more you practice doing this, the better, because you're going to eat up a lot of your interview by doing this step. But it's a very crucial step for your interviewer to understand that you know how your code works and that you're not just memorizing solutions. And now that we have this solution, what they're probably going to follow up to do is ask us to test some of our null cases. So let's quickly run through that. Let's run through 2 cases where we know we have our null cases. The first is where we receive an empty array. What's going to happen is that when we walk through our code, we're going to initialize this P1 value. P1 is going to be equal to 0. What happens though is that we're going to say, is P1 less than nums.length? Nums.length is equal to 0. 0 is not lesser than 0. It's equal to 0. So that means that this for loop automatically breaks. And that means that we hit the end, so we're going to return null, which is the correct answer because there's no 2 pairs we could get. Similarly, what if we had a different case where we received our nums value of 5? I'm just going to keep target the same because we know that it doesn't matter in this case. But what happens is that we're going to step in, and once again, we're going to initialize P1 as 0. But now when we check, 0 is less than nums.length because nums.length is equal to 1. 0 is lesser than 1, so we can continue with our calculation. We're going to get our number to find, which is our target, which is 11, minus the value at P1, which is 0. So 11 minus 5 is 6. NTF is equal to 6. But when we step into our second for loop, we're going to initialize P2 as equal to 0 plus 1. So P2 is equal to 1. But 1 is not lesser than nums.length because nums.length is 1. So that means that this for loop is going to break. We hit the end of this first for loop and we increment our P1 again. Now P1 is going to be equal to 1. And 1 is no longer less than nums.length. So this means that this for loop is also going to break. We hit the next line, which is our return. We return null, which we know is also the correct answer for this test case. So here we see how we have to walk through all of our different test cases using our solution. And you can see how this can get very expensive in terms of the time it takes out of your interview. So once again, just practice so that you don't stumble here and you don't make mistakes when you're keeping track of these variables. Because for you to backtrack, you're just eating up more and more time in your interview. So once again, practice makes perfect here. Now that we've done this, the next step for us to do is to analyze the space and time complexity of this solution. So I want you to try and figure it out yourself first before moving on to the next video where I'll show you. And once you've got an idea of what you think it is, check with the next video and we'll do it together.